Welcome, everybody. This is Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Jose.
I'm Mike.
We saw the Florida Project, and unlike every other time, we actually saw it separately because we didn't have time to go see it together. So, whereas in most podcasts we go see a film together and then we come
in every other podcast.
We see the film together and then we come over to mine and we just talk about it like blind, really. Yeah.
But I saw it 3 days ago.
And I saw it
yesterday. I saw it 2 days ago. You saw it yesterday.
Yeah. So the dynamic is probably going to be like.
Oh, I've had time to ruminate.
Oh, how you could only dream of. Okay, well there are advantages then. So let's begin with your ruminations.
No, so unfortunately, my ruminations have led to very little. I didn't really like it.
Didn't you?
I thought you would like it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I do. I love it.
I've come to the realization, I think, that these kind of slice of life movies do nothing for me.
Well, I think for me, it's like a completely great movie. It's like The Seeker or somebody like that.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing, like, this is kind of modern neorealism. But it does nothing for me, and it never has. Well, and there are other films, like American Honey, obviously did nothing for me, as you well know.
Yes.
I fell asleep in that.
Oh my God, yeah. They're two of my favourite films.
There are elements of Moonlight before things kind of get going in that film that don't capture me.
Well, let me tell you what I did like about it.
Yeah.
I could go on for quite a while, but it's a look at an underclass that I suppose is increasingly represented in American cinema. It kind of hovers on the edges of many films. It was the world of The Place Beyond the Pines, for example. But here it's done without gloss, so to speak. You see people and faces and clothes and ways of life that you recognize as being real. That, these are the people actually that you see around you in many ways, but that you never see in cinema. Yeah, people with too many tats and bad hair and kind of just when I walk to the train station every morning to work, like, people sleeping in alleyways are these people, right? And you almost never see them in cinema like this, really. And I found them moving. I found it moving. I found it so moving. And the point of contrast for me is Ken Loach, right? Whom I admire, but I don't like. And he's a pet peeve in a way. Because when he makes films about a social problem, his people are always so miserable, right? Like, they're always drug addicts and their parents beat them. And it's like relentless grimness. Really, actually, I thought Daniel Blake, actually, Daniel Blake is special because when that man kind of got up in the cinema and,
That's going to forever colour your affection for that film.
It's forever.
If that hadn't happened, you wouldn't like it as much.
Exactly. It's why I prize the experience of watching films collectively in a cinema. But the thing about this film, unlike Ken Loach's films, is that people are poor and they're miserable. Sorry, they're poor and they have to do things that are socially unacceptable, right? And their misery and their need drives them to do things that even they think is wrong. But they have friendships and they have joy and they love their children and, they're kind of like fully realized people. Like, I actually don't believe in this notion that just because you're poor, you can't be in love, or you can't be beautiful, or you can't have great sex, or you can't have deep friendships. I mean, really, it's a banal way of life that thinks that poverty alone condemns you to joylessness. And the thing about this film is it shows you all the grimness, and it kind of shows you the trajectory, but it's kind of clouded in light. I mean, the child is like fantastic. She doesn't see any of it, really. She's like a Huckleberry Finn character, but she's a girl and she's mischievous, and she gets in trouble because she likes to explore things, and and also because she's a bit gobby and she stands.
She's very gobby.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, I wouldn't stand for that if that was my kid. I didn't like her.
You'd slap her around.
The film, I wouldn't slap her. That just makes it worse. But if the film opens up on her and a couple of her friends running around, so the Florida Project is the setting for this film. The Florida Project was the original name of what Walt Disney ended up turning into Walt Disney Land or Walt Disney World in
Disney
Florida.
World, yeah. There was the one in California, and then this was the one that opened in Florida.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be like a huge town, not just a resort. It was going to be a town and a real kind of new community sort of thing, which didn't quite transpire. But and so where these people live it's unclear if it's kind of the remnants of that or if it's just named after that.
Where they live is on the outskirts of that, right?
But they live in a kind of long stay motel kind of place.
Well, it's not even it's a motel, right? And the film makes a point that it's on a week-to-week basis, right? And they have to check out every week for 24 hours so as not to get residency rights.
Is it every week?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't clear on that. But I mean, I noticed obviously they're having to check out of a room and then move back in so they wouldn't be claiming residency.
And that alone, for me was like kind of when you think the rate at the motel, the daily rate is $38 a night, and it's much cheaper than anywhere else, right? Like if you calculate that on a monthly basis, it's almost like $1,200 just on rent, for like people who are like below the poverty line, right? So it's a struggle just to pay the rent. Right, and because they have no job, they can't get anything cheaper. Because actually, if you have an annual lease, it would be cheaper than that, I expect, for the same quality of housing.
Yeah.
So these people are kind of caught in in this.
Yeah. So what the film has done, the title's actually quite good because the idea of the Florida project being this idea of this perfect new future that Walt Disney was going to build has now turned into literally what is referred to America as the project.
Yeah.
This kind of it's.
But it's not even a project.
Well, it's not quite a project because it's not sort of social housing, but it's on that kind of level of housing for people who are incredibly low income, below the poverty line, making ends meet. Just about.
The project would be a step up for these people.
Yeah, the place where the central characters live is called the Magic Castle. It's a motel that's painted all in this kind of purple lilac, and the staircases have sort of castle-like, the things you have on castles at the top that you shoot between.
I think it's called.
Right. It's designed to look a bit castle-y like Disney, and they talk about next door is Futureland.
Yes.
In fact, the shade of purple really got to me because it really reminds me. Although it is, I guess it's kind of lilac, right? So like it's named after a flower. You see it in nature. It's a natural color. But it still feels so fake.
Yes.
It's got the opening shot of the film is the two kids sitting against a wall which is painted in this colour, and you can tell that it's kind of plastered badly, and just been painted over, and then the credits roll just over this image of this wall, and the whole film is kind of at that point setting up, I think, this central image of something that's by its nature is telling you that it's nicer than it is. But it's clearly not.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's what I thought about this colour, this purple. It was
awful. Well, yes. So on the one hand, like, I love the colour in a way. It brought out a brightness. But this idea of it promising something that it doesn't deliver or evoking something that it doesn't live up to is kind of very interesting. Because that's the theme of the film in many ways, right? Like, that's something that the film makes quite a large point of throughout. I found it so moving, really, but it's like you see, it's episodic in a way in its structure, right? So you see like these little vignettes, right, and then at some point, I was just really moved, So it's all very funny.
Do you remember what point?
I think it was at the point where it's clear that the mother has been reduced to like. Selling herself, yeah.
That's quite late on.
Well, it's at that point that the film began to be really moving to me, and then at the end it became like really moving.
The problem I had with these kind of vignettes is that really for 50 minutes, it's an hour and 50 minutes the film, and I know this because I was checking my phone for the time.
Oh, you see, I was
this bored.
It flew by for me.
I was this bored, and the film there are 50 minutes pass before a significant plot point takes place.
I don't mind that. You see, you're too involved with plot.
It's not so much that I'm like Well, maybe it is, but I can't help my just actual reaction to it, which was I was incredibly bored because nothing was happening, and the watching these people just kind of go about their lives and the kind of the atmosphere and the world it was building, I felt like I've got the point of this.
But look at
I've
it another
seen this
way.
before.
All kinds of things are happening.
I know
Right,
things
so-
are happening, but nothing interesting was happening until that point.
Well,
I was
to me,
waiting for a film to take place.
To me, it was very interesting. I mean, basically the film begins and, a young woman, mother, has just lost her job because, she worked at a strip bar and the owner expected her to be a prostitute as well as a stripper. And she drew the line at that. So that's how the film begins. And then basically you see her relationship with her daughter. You see kind of the daughter's relationship with the various children. You see how they get in trouble, how the friendships are ruptured by, the parents, by the other parents. You see her friendship with this other woman. You see the buildup of a community that, it's like a depression film. They all support each other, So, her best friend is basically feeding her. So they go in the back door of this diner and she gives them like the leftover food, the waffles or whatever's been left over for the day.
Because that's where her friend works.
That's where her friend works. So, you're kind of seeing all of these social relations that I think are so vivid and interesting and, and partly so for almost never being represented really. I love that about it. I also think it's so fascinating to see a film where there's no love interest at all, except for the mother-daughter relationship. And there's no love relationship at all. On the other hand, kind of, the main male figure is heroic, right, in his humanity, really. Like, he doesn't do anything heroic, really, but he's just so decent, right? So that combination of it, being focused on women, on a mother-daughter relationship, and then kind of the other protagonist on the film being a man who's not a love interest, but who's nonetheless kind of, he basically is...
He's paternal to a point, and he's
decent,
yeah,
right? And the film gets you to value just basic decency,
yeah,
right? And also he's a kind of a powerless man. I loved Willem Dafoe's performance because, every time his boss came around, you could see how he was also quaking in his boots, right? Like he didn't want to disrupt that relationship with the boss,
yeah,
right? Because that obviously his job is something he depends on as much as everybody else around this film does, right? Like, I think the film also dislodges so many of the stereotypes of, like the underclass and the poor just being stoned and, being unwilling to work all the time, right? So obviously kind of the drugs and so on figure in the film, right? But most of the time you see like this poor, woman just hustling, so you're buying and selling perfume and going door to door and, obviously like kind of, just basically working most of the day so that she could meet her rent, right? And so all the work is just to have a roof over your head, really, because the food is kind of taken from charities and churches and, her friend kind of bringing in food from where she works. It's kind of... It was very, very fascinating to me to see a film this rich in detail and whose subject is so grim and yet the film be so light and funny, I love the young girl in it.
Like I say, I think if I was a parent, I'd have disciplined that motherfucker. Well, this is what
she was so cute.
This is what I was.
And she was just doing what every child does.
She was very good. The actor was very good. But this is what I was going to get at before. The film, when the film starts off, they're running around Futureland, her and her mates, spitting on cars, and they're just so disrespectful. Like, if this is supposed to be a community of people who all help each other and hang out together, I know that this is the next community over from Magic Castle, but nonetheless, they're just gobbling on cars. And then when the woman comes out and tells them off, they literally, I know I swear a lot on this, but they tell her to fuck off.
Yes.
In so many words. And they're 6-7 years old, these kids.
Yes, and then the mother, basically just supports her child, really, and so, until she becomes friends with this lady, but then, they do end up kind of cleaning the car. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to them because the thing is that all of the rules, that middle class society upholds don't apply to them. They they do not benefit from following those rules. Right? So, if they have to cross them in order to get basic food on the table, and a roof over their head, right? Because they have to cross them all the line. I mean, basically, this young mother is basically, a hustler and a con person and a thief, and ends up being a prostitute, right? But you could see how that's not her, how circumstances are making her do these things, right? So, but I think there's an ethos that if you have to break the law just to breathe and eat, then actually breaking the rules about other things are unimportant and inconsequential, right? Like, because those are the facts. The basics are reproducing your own life.
I think the problem I have with it, I guess, is, and I run the risk, I think, of sounding just smug, but I felt like the film didn't tell me things I didn't know, in a way. I think if I were like a Fox viewer who'd been conditioned to think of the poor as leeches, and like 97% of poor people have fridges. Oh, they're living the life, and they're living it up on welfare and all the rest of it. If I kind of thought like that, this film would be anathema, because of everything you say. It shows that life to be very different to that, and it's a struggle, and it's so what if you have a fridge? That's not like the marker of wealth. But I kind of felt like none of that was news to me in this. I don't know if...
Well, to me there were a lot of things that were
didn't feel too original, in a way.
Well, to me it felt very original. It did. As I said, first there's just the faces of people in this movie that I think are very unusual in cinema, and I love seeing them. Those faces and those bodies, really, and the way that like poor people make the woman having the suntan topless, who looked a little bit like, Morticia or something. Yeah, she had so much makeup on and she was so old, and, but she was entirely like made up, and, obviously being well presented was important. And there were just so many touches of people that kind of speak character. And then, there were the social things that I found like so interesting, right? Like, how this underclass of people manages quite well in Spanish. How transport is a real problem to them. They live by the side of the road. They don't have their own transport. They can't get anywhere that they can't get on foot. And on foot, they can't get too many places in Florida, right? So, I mean, to me, all of that was like kind of fascinating. But it was the emotional kind of things in the film that kind of affected me the most. I mean, there were some things that I only understood a little bit later, like... why does her best friend stop talking to her? Right? You can see how she would withdraw her child. I mean, they burned the house down. So you could see how, she would want her child to be separate from the little girl for a little period. But why she would stop talking to her, I didn't understand until maybe the end of the film.
I don't know, I suppose maybe. I mean, that didn't That felt natural to me. I guess I think that the most important things in these women's lives is their children and the safety and health and kind of welfare of their children. And so when that's threatened, it doesn't seem unreasonable that they would shut down completely against the person who kind of threatened that.
I found it unusual, and I was also very surprised when she beat her up. Right, when it erupted into like just fighting.
Taken out on the wrong person. Well, because it's the stresses of the system within which she lives. Yeah, kind of erupting. But beating up that person is not going to help you. Yes, but I guess it's sort of that's, and it's a little bit like, I guess maybe it echoes kind of the way that people are pitted against each other by the powers that be.
Well, I think there is that. And actually, to me, it reminded me very much of characters that you see in 1950s Italian films and Spanish films and Mexican films, right? Because, a lot of it is just the desperation to get by, to survive, right? To eat, right? So all these things that these characters do, like, somebody new comes in the motel and they grab their bags and bring them in for a tip, right? Like, yeah, that kind of desperation for survival. But seen in an American context is very shocking, to me, and it is new, you know.
Yeah, so essentially the kind of the portrayal of parts of American society as near enough third world.
Completely.
Yeah.
And what goes along with it, that how the loss of a social system not only turns people into beggars, but actually even beggars without dignity, right? So for example, kind of one of the things that I've been seeing in Britain that, I only ever associated with countries like Spain and so on, is people not only begging, but begging with their head bowed down and their arms outstretched as if in prayer, right? Like, like they're really begging. They're not just holding, there's not just a coffee cup near them, they're actually literally begging, right? There's a kind of a humiliation, a loss of dignity of, people shouldn't have to do that, right? So those are things that one would never see in places like Britain even 5 years ago, and one is seeing now. And the film had a similar effect on me in terms of some of the characterizations that, there are events and things and people that actually, are new in American cinema or, surprised me.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it certainly is kind of it's a new style, not style. It's a new kind of facet of American cinema in a way that's been kind of coming up over the last 5 or 6 years. There's that other film. I think it was by the guy who made 99 Homes. Let me just double check.
What was it?
Which again, I think for me is slightly why I feel like I've seen this before, because it's Ramin Bahrani is the director. Chop Shop, that was it.
I've not seen that. 2007,
and this was one of the films that was supposed to be, people really rated this. It's one of the films of the year, one of the films of the decade almost. And again, it did nothing for me. Am I a bastard? Am I horrible?
No,
these films do nothing for me.
You're totally schmaltzy, normally actually, but I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm always schmaltzy for the wrong thing. Like I always cry when the robot finds love.
Yes,
but not for people who are in
robots rate a lot higher than people for you.
I know. when actual people are in pain, does nothing for me.
I saw the previous film, which is Tangerine.
Oh yeah,
and it's the famous one that was shot
on iPhone.
An iPhone. And actually, what impressed me there was not the look of the film or anything. It was literally just the way these characters, it's all these drag queens and so on, and just the way that they looked and the way that they spoke. Like, the very language that they used felt so original, right? Like, kind of. I mean, clearly influenced by television and, kind of it's...
I've not seen it.
But actually, kind of just really startlingly original. And I felt like a similar way about this film, except obviously, it's about less dramatic persona. It's about, a woman who's too young to have a daughter that age, really, and who's...
Not really. How old is that girl? She's 25, maybe.
She's meant to be 23.
23.
Yeah, and the girl is meant to be 7 or 8.
Yeah, that's not too young.
Well, that means she had her at 15.
Yeah, that happens.
I know, but it's young.
I know, it's young, but it happens.
Yeah, well, but that's what I mean by too young.
Oh, not like physically too young.
Yeah, but like...
societally too young.
Yes, I mean, right. If a kid has a kid with no familial or social support, there is a time when it's just too young. You can't provide, So,
what you mean.
And I also liked, that look with all the tattoos or whatever. I find it horrible, really. I find it very unattractive. That type of tattooing, not tattooing in general, but with like scrawled pretty much every surface and so on. So that and the hair, it indicates there's also kind of a defiance in the mother, right? Like it is like a defiance of the system. You don't dress like that and have those tattoos and then expect to get a job at a hairdressing salon or something. Certainly not in America. So I think there is a kind of, I don't know, I loved her spirit. I love the mother spirit, right? She's defiant, right? And that's what makes it like kind of so sad. when you realize that, like, you know, the reason she's asking her daughter to take a bath is that she could bring men in to the room for money, right? Yeah, I did find it very moving.
I like the Willem Dafoe character a lot. I like there's one moment which is memorable to me, which is he basically gets annoyed with these kids a lot because they're running around and disturbing people and making a mess. They turn the power off at one point, and they're constantly causing trouble. But so despite the fact that he's trying to get the parents to discipline them, and he's saying you've got to stop this, he's still very protective of them. And when people come round to kind of threaten the mother, and he kind of knocks on the door, and he turns up and says, "I'm the manager, what's going on here?" He basically tells the person to get lost.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what the argument is, but he sides with the mother, despite the fact that up until that point they've been quite antagonistic towards each other. It's again, as you said, that kind of community thing. And then there's one point which I found memorable and enjoyed a lot, which is where the kids are running around playing hide and seek, and they run into his office and go under his desk.
Yes.
And he's like, "Oh, lads, what are you doing?" But he kind of accepts that, okay, just stay under there and don't move anything. And of course they do, but and then the other kid comes in looking for them, and there's this look. It's a really brilliant bit of performance. It's just this kind of like eyebrows up, kind of knowing look. He just like nods below his desk, like there they are, and that's that one point where he plays along with them.
Yes.
And you get this different aspect to it. It's not purely that. They're a bane on his life, but actually he enjoys that moment.
He enjoys them, yes. Actually, I thought there was a point near the end where I thought the child might end up with him, really. Around
when she's been taken away by the social services.
Social services come, yeah.
Okay.
So I thought he was very, he's a wonderful character, and very empathetic. I also like the moment where the child molester.
Yes. Yeah, so there's this guy hanging around the picnic benches where all the kids are playing.
Yes.
And Willem Dafoe's character approaches him and says, "What are you doing here?" And the guy starts coming up with some excuse. "Oh, I was looking for a soda."
Yes.
And he's obviously lying, but he leads him along and he says, "Okay, well, let's go get you soda."
Yes.
And it takes a very long time, and then eventually explodes and slaps it out of his hand. And
because it's so clear he's come for the children.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, that's very interestingly done. It's very beautifully directed, because initially all you see is an old man with the children in what looks like it could be used as a park for everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
So it's not obvious that man is there, for reasons other than, to be there in the grass or whatever, but then it becomes very quickly clear, So he's looking after the children, and he's sympathetic to the people living there. And then there's that sense where, the once a week where they have to go to another motel, so they don't establish residency, they have a deal with the other motel that, they'll charge them only $38 instead of the $45 they normally charge if they come from this motel. And, the lady refuses and he pays the difference, right? So, I mean, there's lots of little incidents like that. So, you're right. Like, I mean, the overarching story is just a woman loses her job, right? Has to make ends meet. She ends up doing what she lost her job for being unwilling to do.
Yeah.
Right? And as a result of that, she loses her child. That's the story in a nutshell. But it's filled through with, like, all of these really moving, beautifully done little vignettes of what life is like, if you are an underclass person. And the life that you lead is exactly the opposite of what Walt Disney promises. And this is done just in the shadow of Disney World.
That's really, right. They live next door to Disney World, and occasionally they pop in on Disney World to try and sell their stolen perfume and get kicked out.
And the bracelets that they nick off.
That's right.
People and so on. So I found this
kind of signifiers of wealth next door that they just not barely have access to, but they just have to use just to make money off. And
well, so basically, the mother is reduced to turning tricks, and basically she steals off her tricks. And, one of the things that you learn is that, like, these 5 bracelets for Disney World, cost $1,700.
Yeah, 4 bracelets.
Yeah. So, I mean, the disparity between, being able to afford $1,700 just to go to Disney World, just for the
Just on
price of
spending money.
entry.
Yeah.
And trying to dream up and drum up and all the work you have to do to get the $38 to pay for that motel. The discrepancy is just enormous.
Yeah.
Right. I also just love the whole way the film was shot, because it's mostly shot in quite wide angles, right? So you not only see the characters, but you see the world, that they inhabit, right? Like, kind of, the background is part of the character. It's part of the story that's being told, right? And so, kind of these children are constantly shot, like, in front of the highway, which is dirty and dangerous, right? With little patches of grass in it, like, it's like the opposite of a neighborhood or a community, in the sense that, like, there's no sidewalks, right?
Yeah.
So it's all parking lots. It's the place is inhabitable unless you have a car, right? And so the children make this. The children, in fact, do make of this very inhospitable place a magic kingdom. I think they have great fun, and for them it's an adventure. And I love the contrast between, the backgrounds that you're seeing, the cheap shops and, the carriageways and the diners and, all these strip malls and so on. And then actually the life that these children imbued it with.
Let's not give the kids that much credit. I mean, the kids, it's not like they're using their imagination to build these beautiful worlds. I think they know the world that they're living in, and they're just there. I mean, for instance, when they go and bum money off people to get ice cream, they're not like, they're not pretending that this is some magic adventure. They're bumming money off people to get ice cream, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they're lying. They're saying, "Oh, I have a throat condition. I need to have ice cream." The doctor says, "It's kind of terrible lies."
But isn't like exactly? So cute and smart.
Yeah, sure, but it's not like that. But the point is, they're not, they're not play acting at, kind of turning the world into something that it's not.
No, but they are. I mean, the scene where they go into the deserted houses, right? So clearly,
there's one.
The banking crisis. All people have left home. There's this whole area that's completely derelict of what were once clearly, like, nice middle class houses are now entirely derelict, right? And they walk through this house and say, "Oh, I might have my living room like this, and I do this, and this I'll have put bookshelves here, and then isn't this a lovely fire? Let's light a fire, So, and of course they burned the whole thing down.
Yeah.
But actually, the spirit in which it's done is very childlike and curious and imaginative, and I think it's a wonderful portrait of childhood. Actually,
there's one scene.
Well, that's one scene.
But there are also a lot of other scenes where they are seeing the world more or less as it is, and interacting with it in a way that takes advantage of it. And
they're seeing their world as children. I mean, kind of, they're smart and they clearly have to survive. So, sometimes they're trying to hustle people and they're 7, and sometimes they're playing hide and seek under a desk because they're 7.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying they're not kids. I'm saying I think it's a very realistic, convincing portrayal of kind of childhood life.
Yes, I think so too.
But I don't agree with this notion that they turn the world into a real magic kingdom. They don't.
I'm not saying that they turn the world into a real magic kingdom, but I think they make fun and they bring fun and light and joy and curiosity and adventure to the world that they live in, which otherwise could have been depicted as just being really grim. Like, kind of, they have nothing to eat except what they get off a church. But actually, she loves strawberries croissants, and they sometimes have them. Or, I mean...
No, I agree.
So, I think actually to be able to turn that world into something so full of laughter is in itself kind of, extraordinary.
What did you think of the very end?
I was a little bit unsatisfied.
Yeah, I was very unsatisfied.
Just because. So
the mother and child are being broken up. Social services are there to split them up and take the child away. The mother is kind of trying to keep that from the kid, but the kid ends up figuring out that she's been moved to a different home, a foster home, and she runs to Future World, which is where she's made this other friend, who's kind of become corrupted by her slightly throughout the course of the film.
Yes.
She's like taken to swearing and stuff like this a little bit, and become a bit of a miscreant. But and you remind her at this point that this 7-year-old is 7 years old.
Yeah.
And she cries.
Yeah.
and it's I want to say it's sort of heartbreaking, but
It was.
it kind of was. But this is for me like I should have been breaking down at this point if this is what I'm like. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, how did they get this performance out of the kid? It's a great performance. It did nothing for me, but that's
so you
what...
think they beat her off?
No, not at all. I'm just, the point is that actually I'm going instead of feeling, I was detached.
Huh.
You know, I was thinking about the performance rather than feeling it.
I was right with it at that moment.
But it is a great moment. You know, you've got to say
it's a great moment.
So after the kid has cried her eyes out, her friend takes her by the hand and they run to Disney World, and they run into Disney World, and you can tell this is shot on an iPhone, this bit.
Yes.
The rest of it has been shot digitally and on 35mm. But this has been shot on an iPhone without Disney's permission.
Yes.
And the last few shots are of them entering the Magic Kingdom and approaching Cinderella's castle.
Yes.
In the film, and there's music coming up, this kind of beautiful orchestral music, and then the film cuts to black, and that's the end.
Yes.
And I felt very... I don't know what the word is, bereft, let down. I felt... I felt kind of predictable, I suppose, the end. Like, I thought, well, at some point they're going to go to Disney.
The ending is...
right at the end.
The ending is interesting, because in a way it's a Pat moment, right? You know, it's like a Pat thematic moment. You're really kind of bringing out the contrast between, like, these children and, you know, the way that things should be. It's not going to be, you know, life is not Cinderella's castle. It's certainly not this child's life. But on the other hand, it doesn't answer any of the questions. Like, it doesn't end the movie. So basically, it's at that moment where the child is being separated from the mother, and they run away, right? And basically, you know that sooner or later, child services will catch up with them or whatever. But it feels both too open-ended and too pat. Yeah.
What do you mean by pat?
Well, you know that...
Like a cliche?
Yeah. You know, too neat, too packaged. Right, you know, so the guy's like the director's bringing the theme home, like is a little bit bludgeoning you with it in a way that's just too neat. So, you know, he wants that contrast between Cinderella's castle and a child now homeless and motherless and running away, right? Like, it's just too neat.
Well, there's a kind of contrast, I suppose, this comparison between the Cinderella's castle and the magic castle that the kid has grown up in, and they're both as fake as each other, really. But she believes in one. She escapes to one when she's been kicked out of the other.
Well, you know, the magic castle is certainly not magic, and Cinderella's castle is not for her.
Well, I'm trying to be generous to the end, to be honest, but I think it's, I think it's like that shade of purple where it looks better than it is.
How could somebody like so schmaltzy about robots and Toy Stories,
I know,
you know, be so stony-hearted about real people?
No, none of these films ever does it for me. And I don't feel like I'm shutting myself off to them. I think like if I really felt it, then I would respond. But
yes, but you don't feel it.
I have a track record of not. It happened with Daniel Blake as well.
Yes.
You know,
well,
I respected the hell out of that film, and I respect this film in some ways, but I don't feel it.
Right. Oh well, what a pity. I hope anybody listening goes to see it though. It's really great.
It is worth seeing, and I don't regret seeing it. That's for sure. It crossed my mind leaving at points, honestly, but not to the point. I would never have actually done it. Like you know. For one thing, I owe it to you to see the bloody film properly.
Yeah.
You know, and you should. You know, it's no harm in seeing a film. I very, very rarely walked out of movies.
I do pretty regularly, but you know,
and certainly not a film like this, which clearly has value, even if you're not enjoying it. And is enjoying it.
Well, I think that's a good point, right? Because you know, films like this that aren't part of some big franchise or. You know that the major drive for making this film was not money, right? It really was like an attempt to express something and depict a particular world, you know. And I do think that that one does owe it to the film when it's so clearly in that spirit to at least try and meet it halfway, right? Like,
yes,
you know. So But but that makes it sound kind of.
Well, it's like it's not up to you to do the film a favour, and if the film isn't good, then it's it's still perfectly valid to say this film isn't good, even if it's made for all the right reasons.
Yeah, but I also think that we often go to the cinema as if cinema in general is meant to be a pleasure machine or something. It's there, to give you pleasure in all these ways.
Yeah.
Which. And I think that's true of some kinds of films, but it's not true of others, right? Like, kind of cinema is an art form. And therefore, I think you have to go to some films just to try to be open to understand whatever it is that they're trying to express, right?
Yeah. Films that they're learning experiences.
And in the ways that they're trying to do so. And not just go in kind of with, that it somehow owes it to you to be, if it doesn't please you in all these ways, it hasn't been a success.
No, sure. I agree. And that's why I stayed. And aren't I a hero?
Been a medal. All right. Well, on that note, shall we end it here?
Yes, do that.
Right. Go see it.
Yeah, you should see it.